Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you to the Chilaram Diabetes Institute and my dear friend Unni. I have been a part of this conference right from the very outset when you first organized it at the Chilaram Institute itself. So it's a great pleasure to be back here and try to keep up with Unni, who's very innovative and tries to keep us all challenged. So in the afternoon session, since you've all come back from this very nice buffet lunch, we thought we'll keep it interactive so we can keep you awake, and we will just sort of walk you through some cases. The topic given to me was cases in obesity, but I really think what the need of the matter is not to label somebody as obese, overweight, but we should start thinking about, is there an underlying metabolic reason why we are trying to treat their body weight as well. So this will sort of be the agenda. I will walk you through a couple of cases, and hopefully when you leave here, you can sort of try to practice what is our approach in our clinic as to how do we take care of these patients, what are we trying to work with. We are all aware, in the first 2-3 minutes, I thought in case people are still walking in, we can just have some epidemiology. 1 out of 5 patients in India is obese or overweight. We know it's a pandemic, and we also know that this is the main driver of some certain serious diseases such as type 2 diabetes, fatty liver disease, and coronary artery disease. You're all very well aware that we use BMI as a very generic measure to define obesity. This is sort of the Caucasian or the Western European guideline, which says that if you are between BMI of 25 and 29.9, you are overweight. If your BMI is 30 or higher, you are obese. And if it's more than 40, you are morbidly obese. But you also need to be aware of the Asian criteria being 2.5 points lower at cutoff versus the criteria in the other part of the world. So truly speaking, we are already considered overweight when our BMI starts to go above 23. So that is the reason why we need to be more cognizant. The reason for this is we see all the underlying metabolic conditions happening at a much lower BMI in the Asian Indian population. And that's why we are called the thin fat Indians, because we are more metabolically predisposed to serious diseases that we just talked about. And why are we getting obese? We know that it's all about calories in and calories out. But is there something else? Is an endocrinologist? Why are the patients being sent to me for evaluation? And when should you be thinking about certain other conditions that we need to look for? Obesity is certainly a very complex, multifactorial chronic disease and is replacing most other chronic diseases as the #1 leading cause. So this is sort of when a patient comes to our clinic, I'm going to jump directly into clinical management without trying to show you too much data, is when our patient comes to us with a problem, and usually they will come to us saying they are overweight, but very often there is an underlying disorder. For example, it could simply be for cosmetic purposes. But more than often, they could have prediabetes or family history of diabetes. They could have fatty liver, underlying gynecological conditions. So we need a detailed history, and then we need a detailed physical examination to look for secondary reasons of weight gain. After that, we do certain routine screening tests for most of our patients, including diabetes, cholesterol, thyroid evaluation, and only in a very select few, which I'll show you some cases, do we send for secondary reasons. Of course, lifestyle management is the cornerstone of therapy. It is disappointing, as we all know, and it's very challenging to get your patients to follow lifestyle therapies. As you're all aware now that Alfans or lorcaserin was recently withdrawn off the market. This is an obesity medication. Have you all heard about lorcaserin? Raise your hands if you've sort of, yeah. So we know that there was some cancer linkage or something. So really speaking, we don't have much to offer our patients in terms of pharmacological measures. So therefore, what do we select for them at the very end? Pharmacotherapy versus metabolic surgery. So let's walk our way through a few cases, and just let me give you an outset as to how can you do a quick office examination. When we are doing our physical, our history taking, a few points in our case pro forma, we always want to know the onset of obesity. Was it childhood obesity? When was the time point when they suddenly gained weight? Was it a sudden weight gain or is it a gradual weight gain? Is there a family history of obesity? Because we know even though obesity is polygenic, there are several monogenic disorders that we can now screen for. Underlying fatty liver, because that will make them at a higher chance of getting cirrhosis. And then other disease states. If you're looking for Cushing's, you look for those purple striae. If you're looking for a history of thyroid disease, pituitary syndromes, is there any other conditions such as uncontrollable eating, appetite? Now, when we examine them, the most common thing you'll find in your obese or overweight patient is acanthosis, which I'll show you subsequently, which is this fine pigmentation on the back of the neck in the non-sun exposed areas, in your underarms, sometimes in the elbows. These are the places you want to look for this pigmentation. Skin tags, they are a mark of growth hormone excess. So whenever we have a patient with acromegaly, we can find this. We look for striae, muscle weakness, a dorsocervical hump in the case of Cushing's. Of course, we will always examine their pulses and blood pressure, etc. And for hypothyroidism, we are always looking for dry skin, myxedema symptoms, goiter, and delayed relaxation of your deep tendon reflexes. So these are just some of the very basic things. This is highly non-specific, as you can tell, right? Most of our patients who are obese or overweight, they complain of fatigue, they don't feel good, they can have a dry skin, they can have stretch marks. So how do we really go about thinking what is going on? The good news is that almost 95% of obesity is not related to underlying endocrine reasons. Less than 5% has endocrine reason or even a genetic factor. So you truly don't need to screen your patients for a lot of things. But even if you miss Cushing's in one of your patients or you miss Prader-Willi in one of your patients, you are going to feel terrible and you are going to fail in treating these patients. Hence, these are the reasons that you want to look for. These are the common things that do appear if you suspect a secondary reason. Hypothyroidism, Cushing's, craniopharyngioma, which is a pituitary hypothalamic-based tumor. Medications, of course. Look for medications that cause weight gain. And these are the common genetic syndromes that we do actually see in clinical practice. And of course, the testing, as I mentioned to you, we do a routine profile, which you can see in the blue form on your, to your left. And a sonography of the abdomen, I really routinely advise it now to look for fatty liver, and also a sleep study, because we are seeing it very commonly that most of these patients have sleep apnea and they fail to lose weight if we don't treat their sleep apnea simultaneously. If you're going to test for Cushing's, the most reliable test in India is the 1 milligram dexamethasone suppression test. 24-hour urine cortisol is cumbersome. Your patient may not be able to do it, but this is reliable. You ask them to take a tablet of Dexona 1 milligram at 11 p.m. at night, and in the following morning, you can go ahead and get a serum cortisol level, and you're looking for that level to be suppressed below 2 microgram per deciliter. That is the number you're looking for. Of course, thyroid testing is simplistic. A prolactin level. Prolactin is like an ESR of any pituitary or hypothalamic-based tumor. So if your prolactin comes higher than 50 or even 100, you need to worry about a central disease. And of course, if you are suspecting acromegaly, you need to look for growth hormone IGF-1 levels. If your screening tests are positive, you should refer to an endocrinologist, because all these tests would need to be confirmed with what we call in endocrine world dynamic testing for pituitary hormones. Okay, so this is a basic, I just tried to put it all in one slide, and now let's see what we can do besides this. As I mentioned, most of our obesity is not related to endocrine diseases. So in most of our patients, especially with diabetes, fatty liver, we also have now started doing something known as a body composition analysis. This machine that we have in our office, we like to use the InBody. It allows us to look at the percent body fat as well as the skeletal muscle mass and certain other complex things such as total body water, phase angle, and the fat-free mass. And we use this in our patients' weight loss journey to make sure we are not causing them to lose any more muscle. Visceral fat. So if you're following a patient who has already underlying fatty liver, instead of getting a sonography every month, you can simply follow the visceral fat. Just like we have BMI markers, fat is probably a more accurate marker for body fatness. So visceral fat, the upper limit in women, normal, is 28%. And the total body fat in men, upper limit of normal is 20%. For visceral fat, we want to try and bring this number down below 10%. And the machine also pops out a report card which allows you to look at what's going on if you look at the bottom. So you can actually nicely follow them in time. This is sort of what the printout will look like, and it gives you a very nice analysis. So at the very top, you have the patient's height, their age. It tells you this is their weight over here. Right over here is a percent body fat. So it says this gentleman's percent body fat is 33. You can look over here if you follow the arrow that the visceral fat level, as I mentioned, should be less than 10%. In his case, it's 15%. So very clearly you can see that even at 102 kilograms and a BMI of 30, Let's now look at something. Let's give him some positive news. His muscle mass, look at the skeletal mass, is almost 110%. So not everything is lost. If you can see over here, as this patient weight has been quite steady for the last several months. So, and we have been maintaining his muscle mass and his body fat level. So even if they are not losing weight, this is something reassuring to look at because it positively impacts their metabolic diseases. And, and the ACE guideline also tells you that when you start treating your patients, you should really try to look at cardiometabolic disease and biomechanical complications and accordingly decide what is the target. Does he need to lose 5 kilograms, 10 kilograms, 15 kilograms? Not everybody has to lose 30 or 40 kilograms. You heard from Dr. Taylor with the direct trial, if you lose 15 kilograms, you can reverse your type 2 diabetes. At that point, you decide to use medical therapy, lifestyle therapy. Okay, so now when you know the why is clear, the how is easy. With all this newly acquired knowledge, I welcome you to my EDMO clinic, and we are going to look at some of the patients who have come here today. Okay? So this is a 29-year-old girl. She came to see us a few months ago. As you can see, her height is 165 centimeters, and her weight is 122 kilograms, giving her a BMI of 45. So as I mentioned, first we asked what is the reason she wants to lose weight. Of course, everyone wants to look good. She was having back pain, she was having irregular cycles, and there was a suggestion of PCOD by the gynecologist. And there was also a strong family history of type 2 diabetes. So is she obese or overweight? Does she have underlying metabolic reasons to lose weight? Okay. Do we need to evaluate her for Cushing's? How many want to say yes? Just raise your hands. So you're not incorrect. She does seem to have certain features. In her case, we did evaluate for Cushing's, which was negative. So again, as I mentioned to you, she did not have any specific stigmata, but these findings can be a little bit erratic. So if you can look over here, follow me along, you can see her reports are not terrible. Fasting sugar is 90, HbA1c is 5.1. She's not diabetic, but that's a very high insulin level. We always look at in pairs. For a fasting 90, her insulin level was 25.8. She already had high non-HDL cholesterol. She had also her liver enzymes were normal and her total testosterone was high. And if you look at her body composition, you can see that her body fat is 52.9% over here. The upper limit of the machine for visceral fat was 20%, and that was her visceral fat was very high. So what we did for this patient is certainly we ruled out that there is a secondary reason. In our clinic, we certainly do use certain pharmacological medications, as well as we start a very intensive lifestyle management program. So all her vitamins were replaced with B12, D3, multivitamins. We did initiate her on metformin, which is the treatment for polycystic ovarian disease as well as insulin resistance. She had not had a period in 3 to 4 months, so we had to induce a period with Devry. And also for a testosterone blocker, we gave her aldactone. Now this treatment was continued and she was enrolled in an intensive dietary program. And over the past 4.5 months, she has dropped her weight, as you can see, from 122 kilograms, and she's down to 103 kilograms currently. And this is her just sending me a photograph recently on WhatsApp. So this is sort of the program that we need to do with this patient. But every single time, we need to work with these patients to make sure they are, if you look at the dates, they follow with us every week. They are coming in every 7 to 10 days for a dietary change or looking at their hypocaloric, isocaloric, protein requirements, and all of this is done very, very frequently. Now let's look at a second case. This is a 44-year-old woman with a history of hypertension, high cholesterol. She complains of worsening bruising, lacerations, puffiness around eyes, weight gain, even though she's very strict with the diet, swelling of legs. She's on medications for blood pressure and high cholesterol, but her blood pressure remains uncontrolled, 140/90. Her BMI is 30. When we examine her, she has this thinning of scalp hair. She is not that obese, but she had this supraclavicular fullness. She's not applied any makeup on her face, but she had this facial redness. And she also had this very classic dorsocervical hump. So actually her physician had already checked a random evening cortisol, which was high at 23 microgram per deciliter. And what was he suspecting? Cushing. So very correctly, he was suspecting Cushing. So again, is she obese? Not really. She's not very obese. So by BMI criteria, yes. But this is somebody we would evaluate for secondary factors. So what we did in this case is we actually did, what we recommend is at least you should do a 24-hour urinary free cortisol We also sent for a late night salivary cortisol, and we did a 1 milligram overnight dexamethasone suppression test. So what I'm showing you over here is that in the blue we have that even though her cortisol level is high, normally you should suppress the pituitary ACTH, but that is a high ACTH. When we gave her the 1 milligram tablet, I said that dexamethasone should go down below the cortisol level below 2. Her level was 20 microgram per deciliter, so it was very, very high. And a repeat test also showed that her cortisol levels were high. When we did the 24-hour urinary free cortisol, we had several values which were high. So this patient was then suspected to have an ACTH producing pituitary adenoma, which are very small, sometimes can be the tune of 2 to 3 millimeters, and you usually need inferior petrosal sinus sampling and a very good quality of dynamic MRI is what we call it, to look for these pituitary adenomas. She underwent surgery and an ACTH producing adenoma was removed. So this was a patient who had ACTH producing pituitary Cushing syndrome. Okay, now moving along, case number 3. So here is a 6-year-old patient who was actually referred to me from the bariatric surgeon because they had gone to him for bariatric surgery. She was a full-term normal delivery. As I mentioned to you, the onset of obesity is always important. She was not overweight. Her birth weight was 2.5 kilograms, but she kept on gaining weight, progressive weight gain. Also, her parents said that she's socially inappropriate. She will pass urine in the public's area. The reason they were sent to the bariatric surgeon is she used to actually just fall asleep sitting in the chair. And she was having obstructive sleep apnea, very severe obstructive sleep apnea was diagnosed. All other testing was normal. I'm not sure if we can look over here at her growth chart. So this is a different case just to highlight that in children we need to do a growth chart. So her height was pretty good. It's about 80th percentile. So normal is between 50th to 75th percentile. But we always have to look at height and weight proportions. If you look at the weight, I pointed out that her weight is more than 200th percentile. Okay? So for her weight, she is short. So whenever you are having a pediatric obesity case, if the patient is short and obese, you should suspect underlying some secondary reason is possible. Secondly, if they have any evidence of mental retardation, that is another opportunity for you to think about some underlying condition. Does anybody want to take a guess as to what could we suspect in her? Her thyroid testing is normal. All her other endocrine testing was normal. She was also eating uncontrollably. If I give you this, they had to lock the refrigerator at home because she would get into the fridge and just eat everything, ice cream, everything you can mention. Sorry? Prader-Willi. So somebody just said, so is she obese and does she need secondary evaluation? Your answer would be yes. Again, the reason in this child's case is it's absolutely life-saving and for management of this patient. So when we did the FISH test for this patient, it was positive for Prader-Willi syndrome. So this is a case wherein it is very challenging. These kids, even with good dietary management and everything, it becomes very, very challenging to bring their weight down and then also to keep their weight down. In her case, she actually underwent a vertical sleeve gastrectomy because her CO2 levels were so high, we were unable to keep her awake and she was hypercapnic. Okay. So now we'll move along. Here's a case number 4 is an 18-year-old boy. He's short and I've written the word overweight. So if you were to see him by himself, you would not even think there is anything wrong with him. Till I told you he's 18, correct? So this is his brother who's 16 years old. Now does he look abnormal? Yes. So you can very well appreciate, so sometimes it's important to call for older pictures, call for pictures of the siblings, and all of these things will help you. So as you can see now, next to his brother, he looks really, really abnormal. In any case, he does not look 18 years old. Again, as I mentioned to you, you need to do the growth chart. So you can see that over here, his height is really in a negative percentile for his age, and his weight is 10th percentile. His weight is negative some 50th percentile. So now certainly he is also short, and that's the criteria by which he becomes overweight for his height. So what do you think we found in this child? Otherwise he was normal, he had normal behavior, he was slightly slow and dull, but he was appropriate in answering. So on testing, his TSH was found to be 150. Can you believe it missed for such a long time? We treated him, and within 2 months, his height had improved by 4 centimeters. His weight went down appropriately from 45 to 38 kilograms. Fortunately for him, his epiphyses are unfused, so hopefully we can offer him some chance of height. Okay. Now here is switching gears, so I'm going to now show you some of the other metabolic things that we deal with. This is a 30-year-old male patient. He's referred to us from our Apollo Liver Transplant Clinic. We have a huge liver transplant program. And in June 2018, he underwent a liver transplant already for fatty liver cirrhosis. So at this very young age, he was probably just 28 when he had to undergo the liver transplant. And this is what he looked like when he first came to see us. And these are the medications sort of that he was already on. I just wanted to point out to you, at the bottom, he's on Advograph and mycophenolate mofetil. So he is requiring rejection medications. He's not currently on steroids. We started him on, he was also taking calcium, D3, multivitamins, everything, because they're pretty vigilant about their patients with liver transplant. We actually added metformin twice a day after food because he was found to be pre-diabetic on his report cards. Again with us, the patient had to be started on something what we call a cyclical ketogenic diet. What we do is we bring them in, and the first diet, which says at 111.5 kilograms when he first came to us, was a GM1 diet, is a hypocaloric diet. Then we allow them to have an isocaloric diet. As you can see, then he goes on ketogenic diet from 7th May to 20th May to 29th May. So almost for 3 weeks, he went on a ketogenic diet. Then he's again going on a second cycle of a low-carb diet. So we actually do a very intensive weight loss lifestyle management program for these patients. And at the end, so from April 2019 to December 2019, we've brought him down from 111.5 kilograms to 84 kilograms. And his liver enzymes went down dramatically, with the Graph medicines on board also. The whole purpose, we do this with our liver transplant patients, is the same process, if they don't lose weight, can also affect the transplanted liver. So it's very important, even after a transplant, to get them to lose weight. So his liver enzymes have remained stable, his platelet counts have remained stable, his GGTP values have remained stable, and his transplant medication, his rejection medication doses have been reduced. So with this kind of extensive weight loss benefit, he has done really well. We also follow his visceral fat. As I mentioned to you, we still try to bring it down below 10% because that would be a good reflection of what's sitting in the liver. And this is what he looks like right now. So he's doing really well. We are trying to get him enrolled also in a weight management program. You can also see how with metformin, this acanthosis has even affected his face, this darkening of his face. Do you notice that? And you see how much lighter his face looks. I don't think it's just the camera exposure. Also, the insulin resistance starts to affect the face. Okay. So this is an example of metabolic liver disease. Now we'll move along and see one more patient, a 28-year-old female patient with irregular periods. So she has a history of polycystic ovarian disease. She's been married for 4 years and trying to conceive, but has been unable to conceive. So she comes to us for infertility reasons. As you can see now, this is the acanthosis I was talking about. You can see in the back of the neck and in the underarms, this pigmentation is known as acanthosis. So definitely her weight is 106 kilograms. She's pre-hypertensive. She also has features of hyperandrogenism. There was no stigmata of Cushing's seen on this patient. When we investigated her, we found everything was normal, but she is A1C is 6%, so she's in the pre-diabetic range with a high fasting sugar, high total testosterone. And both the ovaries showed multiple small cysts suggestive of polycystic ovarian disease. What was very interesting to us on her history when we reviewed her chart is when you look at it, when she was 105 kilograms, she had already been, before she had already had 2 rounds of Clomid, so trying to get her to conceive. And also she had undergone IUI, and she had also already undergone ovarian drilling for polycystic ovarian syndrome, but no one had even started on her on metformin. So very often these things do get missed. The patient may have been prescribed it, but they may fail to take it. So really the number one treatment for these patients is to be started on metformin, weight loss. When they lose about 5 to 8% or 10% weight loss, you will see benefits happening at a metabolic level. Okay. Now the last case that is always near and dear to our heart, so I saved it for the end because all of us deal with these patients on a daily basis. Here's a 44-year-old patient. He has diabetes. That is what we deal with every day, and we are in a diabetes conference. For 18 years, he already has CAD with 2 stents placed and a fatty liver. He's on several medications. He's on insulin 80 units a day. He's on sulfonylurea, metformin, DPP-4, SGLT2 inhibitor, blood pressure medicine, blood thinners, and cholesterol medications. In spite of this, his blood pressure is high. He's overweight at 126 kilogram. His HbA1c is 9.3%. So is he obese? Yes. Does he need evaluation for secondary factors for weight gain? No. This is what we see in our clinic all the time. We do rule out thyroid disease. So my question to you is, what will you advise as the audience? Raise your hands if you agree for diet and exercise. Yes, everybody should be on that. Raise your hands if you think he needs a GLP-1 analog. Very good. Raise your hands if you think Orlistat will actually help him. So really, Orlistat should be an SOS medication, and this is the last case, so I'll be done. And raise your hands if you think he should just go simply straight away to metabolic surgery. Only 3 or 4 people, I'm assuming there are surgeons in the audience. Okay. So what if his BMI, so what we did for this gentleman, certainly, and I'm going to present him in my next talk, which is the ketogenic talk at 3:50. So I invite you back to the best hall if you want to see what happened to him. What if his BMI was 29? Okay. So I agree with the people who picked metabolic surgery. You're not incorrect. By metabolic surgery criteria, he qualifies. By GLP-1 criteria, he qualifies. Now, if his BMI was 29, what will you advise for him first? GLP-1 analog? Would you still send him to metabolic surgery? So nobody in this audience wants to do metabolic surgery, okay? And he does not fit the criteria for metabolic surgery. So the bottom line, what I was trying to present with this case is there is a significant unmet need in obesity. We have really nothing between diet and exercise and bariatric surgery. As you're well aware, besides the GLP-1 analogs, and really the one that is approved for weight loss and has trials is not available in India to us. We can make do with Victoza or liraglutide or dulaglutide, but truly speaking, we do not have any medications available to us for weight loss. So an intensive lifestyle management program is important. It is considered the first-line therapy still for management of prediabetes and diabetes. Please do not miss secondary reasons for weight gain and decide which treatment to choose, because they all do work. So pharmacotherapy alone, but if you combine lifestyle with pharmacotherapy, of course there is no data with metformin showing that there is weight loss. It seems to work very well in our patients to help with insulin sensitization. Adherence is more important. I showed you several meal plans than meal planning. So call them back frequently. This is what really seems to work in our program, is what we have noticed, that when we bring them back frequently, they do really, really well. And what we have is, we have everybody on board: dietitians, physicians, psychologists, mindful eating consultants, general physicians, and bariatric surgeons also. And what we have, what we call a metabolic program. That's truly the need of the hour. I really urge you to take a look at this program online, and I wish all the women in the audience a happy Women's Day. Thank you for your attention.